balance the need for regular maintenance and improving sort of regular service with, I think, the dramatic demand in this region for mega projects. We need to get these big infrastructure projects built that we feel like we're decades behind on.
Job number one is state of good repair. There's no point in having fancy extensions and, you know, brand new lines that interface with the existing system if the existing system has a door, door boarded up and says, sorry, replacement bus service because the tracks collapsed and the elevators don't work. You've got to maintain the existing system in a safe state of good repair.
We have a new federal government, perhaps a new opportunity. What role do you think the federal government should play in transportation planning and investment here in Greater Toronto?
Well, first up, this country is very unusual in that there is no national transit strategy, and I'm hoping that this government will do something about that, because it is kind of bizarre that it differs between the provinces and even between cities and jurisdictions. So I would like to see a national transit strategy, but I think the most encouraging thing is the new government has said, and obviously we'll see if they live up to their promises, they have said that they intend to focus on big cities and on big big infrastructure projects. So we're already drawing up a shopping list to go to Ottawa with. We have plenty of shovel-ready projects, right? I mean, the TTC's capital budget need over the next 10 years is $9 billion, but only $6.3 million are funded. The other 2.7, and they're not nice to have, they're essential things we have no money for. So that's where I think the feds can come in, because I'll be going off to Ottawa to say, okay, you want because they're not going to pay for tarting up the station, right? They want something prestigious. So if you want a prestigious project, how about funding Line 2's resignaling, that kind of thing?
So 2 questions. What can be done to improve the surface transit in the downtown core, like the streetcars just sit on King and Queen Street, as well as parking infrastructure close to the sort of somewhat suburban stations? Like I parked my car today at Glencairn and came down here, but you can't, like there's a very limited number of places there, and I know that many more people would do that if that was possible.
Okay, so first up, surface transit. So there's a number of things that we can do. There are things that we're already doing. One, I brought in a new person to run surface transit, and he's a very experienced operator. He's a guy from Boston, and he used to be the COO at MBTA in Boston, and then more latterly he was the GM at York Region. So a very capable guy. We were lucky to get him. We went after him. And I said to him, right, here's why I'm bringing you in. This is your one big challenge. I want you, once and for all, to crack what people keep telling me is impossible to crack, and I think that's defeatist. The age-old problem of bunching of vehicles, consequential gapping, and consequential short turns. So we're having a blitz on that. We can't do all of the routes all at once, but the 29 Dufferin, we've applied real pressure to, because everyone says it's the suffering Dufferin, right? So it's known that. So we've really blitzed the Dufferin, and the short turns, there's a graph I don't have with me, but the short turns were about 400 a week. It's down to about 20. And typically now we only short turn if you have to, like there's a collision ahead of you or whatever. And then the other route that we focused on, and this is about putting back route supervisors and also making sure that vehicles don't leave in clumps and bunches. And we put more time into the routes. The 512 St. Clair as well we've addressed. So we're going to do all of the routes. So on to King and Queen. I mean, I have to say, I floated some time ago, I think it was 2013, I knew it would be controversial. I went out and stood on King Street, and I took the media off, I was going to be there, and the chair of the day knew that I was going to do it, and I said we should stop messing around and have traffic, car-free transit runs through the centre of town in the peak. And I kind of knew we wouldn't get it right, but it was deliberately provocative. And it met its aim because we didn't quite get car-free, but what we did get was the city was kind of forced into putting up a whole bunch of no left turn signs, much more enforcement on parking, some restrictions on deliveries, and the current mayor has really helped us in that respect. So, I think there are things you could do, structural things that you can do to make the streetcars run more smoothly, in addition to all-door boarding and to things like Presto, so you don't stop at the stops for so long. But I think fundamentally we should be biting the bullet and having more transit priority traffic lights, so where the streetcars can actually maintain the lights at green or change them from red. We have some, but we don't have enough. I think we should have more dedicated transit ways and an absolute rigid all-out enforcement of people parking. We are going to fit forward-facing cameras, hopefully, to some of our vehicles, so that we can better police things. So to me, that's really the thing. You've got to give this transit a fighting chance of getting through ever more crowded streets. With regard to parking, we do have some car parks. It's not our core business, and what typically is the impediment is that we just don't have the land. But where we do, we are looking to partner up more effectively with Toronto Parking Authority, so that it's a more how can I put it, a more attractive proposition to come to park your car and not take a car downtown, but to take the TTC.
Talking a lot about Line 1, the downtown core, but then you were also saying that a lot of people live in the periphery because it's very expensive to live downtown and travel downtown every day. I'm part of that crowd. So I find that once you get past maybe like Bathurst, going over on Line 2, the bus service there gets a little bit shaky. So it was looking at the rolling out in September of the less than 10-minute wait for buses, but still at Runnymede Station, like we'll get there, it's 5:45 and the next bus is 18 or 20 minutes away, which is a really long time, and then you have lineups snaking around the corner and people just jumping at buses when they get there. So are you going to be rolling out these great ideas to the outer line stations in the next little bit?
So there's 141, I think it is, bus routes, and we can't do them all at once. A, because you have to have time to study them, and a lot of the schedules haven't been looked at for some time, and B, because it is quite labour intensive in that right now, and I think we can make better use of technology going forward, but right now, what it really relies on is route supervisors. Now, they don't have to stay on the route, and we will progressively take them off Dufferin, but we're going to keep a real close look at Dufferin to make sure it doesn't slide back to how it used to be. And we'll progressively then look to other routes like Jane and Finch and Bathurst and some of the other primary routes to introduce those same disciplines. We haven't finished on the rollout of the new service yet. There's still a bit more to come. We're going to be introducing more express bus routes from January, and the only reason we haven't done that yet is we needed more buses, so we've ordered 50 more buses. They're going to arrive this month. We just commission them, get them ready, and then we'll be rolling out more buses. What will help us, you remember I mentioned when I started, I said it's about modernising people, processes and equipment. So I've talked about equipment and about the people, i.e. the culture. Let me give you a classic example of processes. Our buses and streetcars have a state-of-the-art information system on board. Well, it was in 1975, I think it was. It's, believe it or not, a text-based system. So it's called a CIS system, and it's in these ancient sort of trump units. So it's very difficult, even though the vehicles are equipped with GPS, it's very difficult to track where the vehicles are, but also to contact the vehicles in order to tell them to do something different. So we are moving towards what's called CAD-AVL, which is Computer-Aided Dispatch Automatic Vehicle Location. That's being fitted to all the vehicles. It's going to take a bit of time. It'll take about 2 years because you've still got to procure it and fit it. That will make a huge difference because we'll be able to impart information, and it will stop straight away the nonsense that goes on whereby, and it must bug you, sometimes people get off a streetcar at Queen in good faith, go down onto the platform and find the subway's not running. So what do? Come steaming back upstairs and have a right go at the next streetcar operator to say, why didn't you tell us? Simply, they didn't know, they had no idea. But with the modern system, we'll be able to communicate with individual vehicles, lines of route, and the whole network. So it will get better. You would not believe the fight I had to put up to get CAD-AVL at City Hall, because people just said, you've got a system, why do you need a new system? Because the old one doesn't work. Well, it does, you've had it for 30 years, why can't you make it last a bit longer? Well, are we serious about improving transit or not? So we won the day on that argument.
Well, thank you for coming, first of all. You mentioned that the budget is coming up, the budget meeting, and I was looking through the preliminary report, and I saw that Real-Trans is an increasing cost, and it's going to keep increasing as the population ages. I know a lot of Wheel-Trans happens through cabs. It's licensed out to cabs. I'm wondering if there's any push or movement to improve the Wheel-Trans service or the way it's delivered, because I don't hear anything about it.
Well, actually, the best feedback for me about how well Wheel-Trans is running is from the Wheel-Trans customers. And I actually think Wheel-Trans as a concept is one of the jewels in our crown. I think the Wheel-Trans operators are absolute saints, actually, and people don't realize it's a door-to-door service. The reason it costs so much is because, rightly, absolutely quite rightly, the fare is the same. It's still $3. But the cost is actually about $30 a ride. So we inherently make a loss on Wheel-Trans. So what are we doing about it? We progressively want to change the model. By 2025, the whole of the TTC will be accessible. So all of every single station will have an elevator. All the buses are already accessible. All the streetcars will be accessible. So what we should be looking to do is, rather than do door-to-door service, we would transport people to the nearest accessible transit hub, and then they would take the conventional system. Apart from, of course, those people whose physical impediment or mobility impairment is so bad that they still need door-to-door, and we will, of course, still provide that. One of the ways we're going to cut the cost of Wheel-Trans but maintain the quality is the existing Wheel-Trans units are based on a big Ford truck, and we actually buy them as a truck and then cut them up and convert them, which I just think is ridiculous, and the unit cost's massive. So we're looking at changing the model to smaller units that would only carry, say, 3 wheelchairs as opposed to 6, because you rarely see 6 in them. So you'd have a much more nimble fleet of smaller vehicles that can get in and out of places easier, and we will be able to carry more people for less cost, I believe. That plus more and more accessible taxis across Toronto.
I want to pick up on that question with a quick follow-up. A few years ago, I had a student who was looking at Wheel-Trans and travel across municipal boundaries, and it was really quite striking that it was done very informally, and often the two operators weren't communicating. And so I'm wondering, since this student did this project probably 5 or 6 years ago, if there's been any improvement to coordinate that part of the service better, because the interview she did found that this was a real impediment for some of our Wheel-Trans users really relying on that service.
Well, we had an accessibility forum down at the X probably 2 months ago, and the feedback was generally way more positive. And you know, but because I have heard horror stories like that we would in good faith take someone up to, say, north of Steeles, and we can only go about a mile into the above Steeles Road, so into York Region, and we're not allowed to go any further than that. So you drop someone off, and then we've had a few horror stories where some poor sod's been left in a wheelchair because the York Region bus is, for whatever reason, half an hour late. And to be fair, it could happen the other way, right? So we brought in a new head of Wheel-Trans. It's a very capable lady who used to be at Pearson, so it's another new manager who's come in. And I think she's done a really great job in regularly working with her counterparts in the other jurisdictions to have a much better sort of hardwired approach to make sure things like that can't happen, because you have very, very clear lines of communication to make sure the customer's not left stranded.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm first of all really glad to hear how great the TTC has vision for its future and the sort of projects that we want to accomplish. What I'm wondering though, because it seems like time and again, the limiting factor for this vision is money. What is the strategy, or what general strategy do you have to increase the amount of subsidy that the TTC will get so that we can fund all these great ideas?
So it's really mounting a campaign to try to make the case for the province. I mean, the feds don't normally get involved with subsidy, but for the province, which, as I said, used to, until about the mid-80s or maybe early 90s, it used to be 50-50 funding from the province. So what we're trying to do is say to the province, look, we're not expecting you to go straight to 50-50. The chair moved a motion the other day to progressively say, well, how about we move to $1 subsidy, because we get 89 cents. So how about giving us 11 cents to make it up to $1? That would make a massive difference. And progressively, just little by little, because we know the province is strapped for cash, but progressively move back to a more equitable funding model. And the argument we're deploying is that it makes sense. If, you know, at the end of the day, Toronto is the economic engine of Ontario, you need to cut the congestion, you need to have an effective transit system. So we are looking to make a viable case and to continually lobby to get the province to cough up in terms of funding. Then just other things, we've tried to cut our costs. So we've contracted out some things. It was highly controversial. I was not flavour of the month with the union for doing that, but it was non-core activity. So garbage collection, washroom cleaning, and the bus service lines where the buses get fueled and washed. That is now done cheaper and better, I think, by a private company. We've brought in bigger vehicles, which are inherently more efficient because it's a bigger vehicle, carries more people, but it only needs one person. There's a whole bunch of things we've done. We hedge our diesel costs so that we lock in at cheap diesel costs. Again, to try to maximise what we get from the subsidy, but at the end of the day, it is a struggle. At the end of the day, it's not easy running a transit system on 89 cents subsidy, but also, and this is again a bit of a nonsense, you do not know year on year what your subsidy is. Every year we have to go through the same ludicrous budget cycle and basically with a begging bowl, begging for more money. Where I came from, London, now London Underground has a ring fence, guaranteed £10 billion 10-year funding envelope, and it's just being transformed. We can only dream of that.
Just to follow up on that one, Andy, when you say subsidy from the province, are you talking about capital subsidies or operating cost subsidies?
The latter, operating costs. I mean, to be fair to the province, it's not completely one-sided. The province and the feds do give us money for capital projects. So the rockets, the new streetcars, the Spadina extension, they are making capital contributions to those. But apart from a bit of gas tax, we don't get any OPEX funding from the province.
So let me just try to explain what that means in practice then. Every time the federal government or the province gives the TTC money to expand its service for the capital cost, Andy has to come up with more money to pay for the operating. It adds more cost on the operating if you have more service that has been paid for on the capital side. So this is creating even greater pressure on the system. And it gets back to my question about how do we balance out operating existing services versus new services. If we're building new infrastructure and that's being subsidized, that's great, but we have to still pay for it. And that new infrastructure and that new service still is requiring additional subsidy every time it gets built.
Well, it is, and a real concern of mine, because the Shepherd line, which is great, you use the Shepherd, beautiful stations, but it's nowhere near covering its costs, and I predict the same thing's going to happen with Spadina. I mean, eventually it will get really busy, but initially, apart from going up to York University, those stations north of York University will not be, the service won't exactly be packed, because it takes time to build ridership. And as you say, absolutely, your cost per rider gets, the gap widens even further. Because it's often misunderstood. People think, yeah, but hang on a minute, you're getting 1.8 million riders a day, you must be coining it in terms of revenue. And absolutely, the revenue comes in. But the average cost of a ride, running the TTC, the average cost of a ride is $3. The average income we get is $2. So for every additional rider we add, we actually need more subsidy. And in case you're thinking, that's funny, the cash fare is $3, well it is, but most people don't pay the cash fare, there's a lot of discounts, so the average fare is $2. So the more riders we add, the more cost we incur.
Can you give the students a sense of how much the secondary revenues are? Because I think there's often a view that maybe we could boost advertising or sell the names of stations. Can you give people a sense of how much money currently things like advertising and your secondary revenues like rents to Gateway or other shops is actually bringing in, just to round out that picture of where your money and what your opportunities to raise revenue on your end are?
Okay. So the ways you raise revenue are in no particular order. Things like advertising, tenancies. By tenancies I mean like Gateway, little shops and stuff. We're partnering up currently with BAI, Broadcast Australia, to provide cell service and Wi-Fi, and we're partnering up with Wind and hopefully Rogers and Bell in the future, and they pay us a fee in order to be able to serve our customers. Things like naming rights it's always controversial. If you try and change the name of the station, it's World War III down at City Hall. So in terms of the figure, it's not huge. I mean, the TTC's operating budget is over $1 billion. The revenue we get in is around $1.8 billion. Secondary revenue probably accounts for $50 or $60 million. So it's not huge. The advertising campaigns are contract rather is about 25 million. And the cell service Wi-Fi over 3 years, they're going to pay us 25 million, which is way better than what the big carriers were talking about. So we are looking to improve upon that. I think the one thing we should do, although space is limited in our stations, I would like to really see the retail offer improved. I mean, Gateway's fine, and it's nice to have a little newsagents and a coffee shop, but I think we could do better than that. I'd like to see sort of mini Loblaws and, you know, sort of much more high quality retail outlets, and you could probably charge, and Starbucks and things like that, you could charge a premium for those.
If I can pick up on the question about the sharing economy, what do you see the role? We've seen some proposals coming forward, like what was it, Line 6, I think it was called, and also obviously the rise of Uber. How do those types of services integrate with a modern public transit system?
So Line 6, in case you don't know what that is, it was a short-lived minibus service from Liberty Village, which provided a quick service if you didn't want to try and ram onto the streetcar on King. So I kind of got why they did that. It didn't really take off, but there was a sort of limited take-up. And we I have to say, we turned a blind eye to it. It's actually, you're not allowed to run a private service. It's only the TTC that can run transit in Toronto, but we kind of turned a blind eye to it because we kind of got why people were doing it. But that plus Uber, we see as complementary. People say to me, "Oh, aren't you worried about Uber? It's going to, you know, suddenly you see a massive drop in the TTC ridership." I just don't buy that. We, you know, 1.8 million people. I can't see suddenly disappearing to go off to Uber. So I've always thought that transit should be multifaceted in terms of the transit offer. What we should be doing is making it more seamless. So you have bike stations at stations, you have good interchange with Go and buses and Uber and private taxis. That's how we should all be working together.
There was another question, I think, at the back there.
Sorry. So with the advent of Presto at the end of next year, and the cost of public transit right now being as high as it is, are there any plans to look into using sort of flexible pricing models based on times of day, especially as people are now, like during the Pan Am Games, encouraged to commute earlier or commute later, and companies are sort of doing this more and more? What plans are there in the works?
So that can be done. And also, the way I thought you were going, because it's kind of linked, is would we look at, say, zonal fares, so whereby you have zones, a bit like what you do in London, because people often say it's kind of unfair that if you live, I don't know, Rosedale, why do you have to pay the same as someone to go downtown as someone coming in from Scarborough? But there's counter arguments to that as well. But the big enabler is, as you suggest, Presto, because with a smart card, and obviously that's the whole point, it's a smart card, and modern gates, you could set the gates up to deduct a different amount dependent on the time of the tap in, and if you wanted zone fares, tap out as well. So one step at a time, let's get it in. It would be a political decision because it would be quite controversial, and we would want to do that in conjunction with the other GTHA properties, but it's definitely possible. And I think we should look at it, absolutely.
Picking up on that idea of variable fares, do you have any ideas on a low-income fare?
Again, well, funny enough, that's again topical. We are looking at it, but not just as the TTC. It's being looked at by Deputy Mayor Pam McConnell at the city. The city has been working up a low-income strategy. So not just looking at the cost of transit, but the cost of using city services and stuff like that. And there's a report due to come back to council at the beginning of next year, or the first quarter of next year, in which transit will form part of that report. Because clearly some people, you know, are less fortunate than others and need greater assistance. So rather than do it just for transit, we're looking at the more holistic picture.
Next one, thank you so much for coming. And actually, I attended the board meeting, the public session last month in the City Hall, and we were talking about the smart app. So I wonder what kind of job role of TTC will play in the smart track plan?
The big role for Smart Track, and the operation has yet to be determined because at the moment it's a proposal, Smart Track, it's being costed and all of the various implications are being looked at. But it may well be, if Smart Track takes off, it's possible that the TTC would actually operate it. Crosstown, it will be, there will be Metrolinx light rail, light rapid transit units, but it will be TTC staff operating it, in case you didn't know. But the main input for Smart Track from the TTC will be bus feeders. Smart Track is really only viable if you have excellent bus service connections, because basically the buses bring people in to the station who then board Smart Track to then head off downtown. So we will need to change a bunch of bus routes, and we're looking at the implications right now, but that will be the primary TTC role.
So a few summers ago, I almost got my Metro Pass confiscated because I didn't have the post-secondary student ID. And it was scary, it was the first of the month, but a few weeks later the TTC announced that high school students no longer needed to get that ID, which was a relief. But now post-secondary students still need to get that card, and while it's only $5.25 a year, and I understand the whole part-time versus full-time status, it still seems very unnecessary, and this takes out time because we do have T-card and student IDs, like other universities would accept. So is there any possibility of removing that necessary ID?
Okay, I mean, I can't claim to be an expert on this. The reason we took away the need for kids ID was because actually it was in advance of the mayor's announcement on free kids under 12 riding, but also it was kind of a nonsense. You had kids coming out of school wearing school uniform, and then we were insisting on seeing ID to see if they were a school kid, but it's kind of obvious, unless there's some kind of weirdo that dresses up in school uniform, which could happen, I suppose. But for students, so again, I can't claim to be an expert on that. I think the main reason is because we want to see if it's an eligible post-secondary establishment, because you have to, there's actually specified places. If, for example, you're a resident of Toronto but you go to school in Hamilton, you can't get the discount. It's got to be a Toronto-based secondary education establishment. But again, I'm not really an expert on that. I'll mention it to my chief customer officer, who could, I'll mention that came up tonight.
So if I can follow up, because I think part of that question is about the relationships and how you work together with other parts of the planning apparatus in the region. And I guess that's my follow-up question, is how does the TTC work with the city and Metrolinx and the different municipalities who in many cases are responsible either for the on-street planning or alternatively the regional planning? I mean, we read in the newspaper about mixed relationships there and often some tensions. So how do those relationships come together to allow us to do the types of planning and implement the types of policies that have been mentioned here?
Well, if you read the paper, we're constantly fighting and squabbling with Metrolinx, and it's just simply not true. There is I call it a creative tension, in that they've got a job to do, we've got a job to do. A classic example of where we're working with Metrolinx is on the crosstown, where although they're building it, we're going to operate it, and also they can't just build it in isolation. There are interchange stations at places like Yonge and Eglinton, so we need to make sure that in building that interchange, it works with our station. You don't want to create a problem for our station, because they've got the design wrong. So we meet with them pretty much daily. There are regular meetings to do with Presto, which is of course a Metrolinx product. We have various executive level interaction where we meet with them. We have meetings with the city, we have meetings with the city and Metrolinx. There's a body that is formed where all the GTHA properties get together, and we talk about items of common interest, things that have come up tonight, like or sort of zonal fares and fare integration, that kind of stuff. So a lot more goes on behind the scenes than you might think, actually. At the end of the day, it's all about the customer, and it should be a seamless experience.
One piece of the follow-up, just very quickly, is about the relationship between transportation and land use. We know that there are some properties that could be redeveloped that the TTC owns or that the city owns around some of the stations. How do we get some of that work done? Because there is an opportunity there both to do better planning, to get people closer to transit, and potentially to raise some revenue.
Absolutely. So, I mean, what often gets thrown in our face, but it's not exactly a like-for-like comparison, is people say, well, why don't you do what Hong Kong does? And Hong Kong is basically a development, the MTR is really a development company that runs a railway on the side, whereas most organizations are a railway company with a bit of development. But the fundamental difference is Kowloon and Hong Kong Island are so densely populated that, you know, even I don't know, an eighth of this room would be worth a fortune, whereas land property values are just not as elevated here. But having said that, I do think it's kind of criminal that a lot of our stations are single height structures that could have been properly developed, whereby the station would be in the base of that development, and then you'd have a block of flats or an office block or whatever above it. And we are trying to do that. So we work closely with Build Toronto to identify sites that are either surplus to our needs or that we want to see developed. So we're looking at a big development at Bloor and Islington, for example, where we are hoping to leverage for free the easy access upgrade of that station, which we can't currently afford. So the deal would be, okay, developer, you can have that site, but the deal is, you, as part of it, you've got to help us make that an accessible location. And we also have some surplus accommodation. There's an old bus barns on, streetcar barns actually on at Cotswell, and we would like to release that. That would go back to the city and they can then develop it. One thing that is an absolute bugbear of ours is that if we have to declare property surplus, we don't get a single dollar. It has to be given to the city, and they then, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all taxpayers' dollars, right? But it kind of bugs me that we could raise a load of money to plough straight back into transit. We're not allowed to do that.
Given the mounting pressure on the Yonge University Spadina line, what kind of practical timescale can we expect at DRL, and also the extension of the cross down to the airport? And I know that I haven't finished taking that.
So there is a tentative plan to continue the crosstown onto the airport, but that project, that's due to finish in 2021, and then they'll look at a phase 2 to take it through to the airport. I mean, I've got, and the good news is at least you now have the UPX to go up to the airport, so from the south, from Union, that's served. I still think there's got to come a point where Line 2 gets extended to the airport. It's just so tantalizingly close, and although the 192 rocket is actually a very good service, I use it to get to Pearson all the time. It's just such a no-brainer to swing Line 2 round to Pearson. In terms of, sorry, I've forgotten the first part of it.
DRL.
DRL, yeah, the DRL. So the relief line, realistically, even if we started today, you're looking at least 10 years to do the planning and the procurement and the environmental assessments and the geotechnical digging and figuring out the alignment and then the actual construction. But we don't technically need it, it's not critical until 2031, which is the projection that by which all of the benefit that we'll have added with bigger trains and automatic train control and re-signalling, that will have all been swallowed up because of the exponential growth in Line 1 usage. So that's why I keep going on about it. Even with Smart Track and everything else, we cannot forget the need for a relief line.
So I have to ask you this question because some of my students who do these international projects and look around the world at what's being done, have you looked into cable cars? Has anyone seen these examples of cable cars? It sounds kind of far-fetched, but they just launched one in London quite recently, and they've been working in Latin America. They're kind of a low-cost way of providing intermediate transportation. They can be built fairly quickly, and certainly a lot of our students who do international-based projects have noticed these as a potential technology that might have some potential here. I'm wondering if that's come onto your radar.
So I'm aware of them. I mean, I've not actually been on it, but I'm aware of the Emirates airline in London, so I know where it is. I've just never been on it. And I have to say, from my sources in London, it's not exactly the world's most utilised transit mode, but maybe it's just because of where it is. So I think they have their place. It's certainly not mass transportation because the cabins aren't very big and you know, you can't really move the masses that way. But I think we do have to be imaginative. I think light rail has its place, There will be an LRT on Finch, that's been announced by Metrolinx. At some point, something has to be done from Don Mills round to Scarborough. So what would have been the extension of the Shepherd line, that's slated to be an LRT, but that's not currently prioritised by Metrolinx. There's got to be some sort of higher order transit along the waterfront. If you go to Liberty Village, if you go to anywhere in the Portlands, there's just completely bereft of transit, and yet there's all these tower blocks going up there. I know I go to Liberty Village quite a bit, and it really worries me that there's all these beautiful condos. Where the hell are these people going to go in terms of transit? They can't possibly get on the King streetcar. So that's got to be looked at. One thing that I think is criminally underutilised, albeit the winter would be more of a challenge, is Lake Ontario. To go from Scarborough, where the lake curves around, a sort of high-speed catamaran across to Union, or to the Jack Layton ferry terminal, that seems, again, a complete no-brainer to me, but not currently being looked at.
What I'm thinking is, because I personally enjoy like Spadina streetcar a lot, because it's kind of like separated from the actual transit, but the Queen streetcar and King streetcar are like combined transit with the drivers. So, I mean, it's kind of like a struggling for both the drivers and the streetcar riders, because they're just suffering from the congestion, and especially like King Street is like a central part of the King Street are part of the CBD of Toronto, which is very busy. So, and also the streetcar tracks on Queen Street and King Street are actually like very a little bit like kind of safety concerns for both like cyclists and also riders, especially in winter. So I just want to know like your thoughts on these two streets, about like there should be a like BRT or LRT, or because we're kind of thinking about subway, or what's like your thoughts on these kind of you have this shared road of streetcar drivers. Thanks.
So there's no two ways about it. The ideal is to separate modes of transit, right? So Spadina and St. Clair and Harbourfront and Queen, for that matter, where it runs in its own dedicated right-of-way, are inherently easier to operate, because you've got your own right-of-way, there's no one getting in the way. All right, you still have to come up against intersections, but it's just inherently easier, and it's also safer because customers aren't getting out into the path of cars, because sometimes people don't respect these stop behind the door signs. But we are where we are, and people sometimes say to me, well, we should rip out the streetcars and run buses along Queen. Well, careful what you wish for, because a streetcar can carry way more people than a bus, so what you would end up with is an absolute traffic jam of buses running along Queen Street, and it's not going to be as green because they use diesel, so that's more fumes, but also because you have to run way more vehicles, you'd have to buy more vehicles, so that's more cost, buy bigger barns to store them, and have more operators in order to operate them. So actually, the much maligned streetcar is actually, if it's given a fighting chance, a very efficient way of moving people, which is one of the reasons why a lot of US cities are putting back streetcars. Cincinnati's about to go live.
It's about the late night service and the Blue Line particularly. I'm someone who finds myself on the transit after midnight quite a lot, and it's definitely a frustrating experience. Specifically now, because for many years now, after 12:30, trying to go north of Eglinton, you have to get on a bus. Usually with the blue night buses, they're very crowded, obviously, and like I mentioned, not very reliable in terms of wait time. So my question is just, what can people expect in terms of improvements as the city gets busier, as more people are out later, or is it something that has to get worse before it's going to get better?
Okay, so one of the improvements that we've been rolling out is more night bus and night streetcar service. So the Blue Night network was beefed up in September, so you should, if you haven't already, you should start to see an improvement in that, because we're literally putting out more service. On Line 1, there's two reasons why we have to suspend the service early on a number of nights a week. One, because the concrete slab under Lawrence Station, is worn out basically, so it's having to be repaired, which is something that you can't do when trains are running. That's almost finished, so we should have that wrapped by the end of this year. Then the other job that we're doing, which is inch by inch, is removing asbestos from the tunnel. So it's not currently disturbed, but you've got to get rid of it. So that is a painstaking task, because it's literally every tunnel ring has asbestos in it, so it's progressively being removed. But as we progressively upgrade the signalling system, and particularly also when we hopefully do get some additional capacity like a relief line, then we would be able to have an alternate route to run. People often ask me, well, the big question is why can't the subway run earlier on a Sunday? We are going to do that, subject to budget. It's a motion with with the TTC right now. My boss moved a motion, and we think, well, we have, not just think, we found a way of starting the subway 1 hour earlier at 8 a.m. on a Sunday. But ultimately what we want to get to is 6 a.m. But it's going to take time because we absolutely need that time to do essential maintenance checks, safety checks, but also progressively roll out and install the new signalling system. So I wouldn't say it's going to get worse before it's going to get better. We're trying to mitigate it and at least keep it as no worse until it definitely does get better.
I want to pick up on that question and ask about accessing university campuses at all hours. Here at U of T St. George, we have pretty good access at all hours. Some of our other campuses in the region, and in the city in particular, are less good. Places like University of Toronto Scarborough. Do you have plans to make those stations easier to access at all hours of the day?
When you say easier to access, what do you mean in terms of service provided?
More frequent service.
Yeah, so I mean, well, effectively that's what we are doing in that let me just step back a second. The cuts that were imposed upon the TTC in 2011 and 2012, because all city agencies had to take these pretty savage cuts, that was completely anathema to us. It was completely counterintuitive that when customer numbers are rising, the last thing you should be doing is cutting service, but we had absolutely no choice. We had to do it. So we're now, thank goodness, we've got a more enlightened council and a mayor who believes in public transit, and we've practically restored all of the cuts that were made in 2011, 2012. But we're going beyond that with the additional service that we're adding, the night bus service, more all day service, and more 10-minute or better. And that is pretty much across the city, so it does include Scarborough and Etobicoke for that matter.
And a question that often comes up, is there any economy in running smaller buses in some of the suburban areas where ridership might be lower, but you still want to be able to provide frequent service, or does that not change the economics of this?
We've had a look at it, but there's some benefit, but the trouble is you end up with little sub-fleets, which do ultimately add to your cost, because you end up maintaining a different type of bus. You've got to train the mechanics on how to maintain that particular vehicle. You don't get the economies of scale that we currently do of ordering a mass order of, say, 80, 100 of the standard size buses. So we're going to keep it under review. We are going to go for smaller buses on wheel-trans, as I said earlier, but smaller buses for, say, off-peak hours, it's actually kind of inefficient. It's a bit like on the tube, we used to break up trains in the off-peak and have, say, 3-car sets running around or 4-car sets. But you spent so long doing the uncoupling and the shunting in order to do it, you might as well have just run the whole thing anyway. And actually the driver cost is still the same. So your fixed cost of an operator is still the same. The fixed cost of gas is pretty much the same, or actually variable cost. So the only thing you're really saving is a lower unit cost, which is a one-off on a smaller bus.
I just have a question in terms of cost. We've been talking a lot about we're lacking funds clearly, but then children under 12 are now riding free. Have you seen whether this, or I guess in your opinion, do you find this is hurting or helping the TTC? And if you could just give an example as to how, either way.
So that was a decision that the mayor asked. Is the mayor's initiative. So we support that. That's fine. And it was a condition for the extra $95 million that we were then awarded by City Council. So it was all factored into the budget. And I get the rationale. It means that you get kids more used to riding the TTC, familiar with riding the TTC, who hopefully will then become lifetime TTC users. It also meant that families who couldn't previously, or even school parties that couldn't previously afford for kids to go on a school trip, or as a group, or maybe as a family, they now do. So I think it's had a big positive benefit. But having said that, we're still evaluating the impact. You need to leave it about a year really to see has there been an impact on revenue, has there been a sort of an uplift in bad behaviour or whatever. Only this morning I was at Arrow Road Division talking to bus operators, and you know, they're not all complete fans of it, because you do have, you know, 17-year-olds, and they're clearly 17-year-olds going, no, I'm 12. And it's like, really? So we are looking to see, should we reintroduce a control, say, yep, fair enough, you get free travel, but you've got to have some form of ID. So we haven't decided on that yet, but we have introduced fare inspectors who are going around checking on people's tickets to make sure that people aren't ripping us off. And if they did, if they were a kid, you go, oh, that's nice, what's your date of birth? And if they went, you're like, you know they're lying, because you're like, you don't know your date of birth. Or they try and do the math and they get it wrong. So the jury's out on it, I guess. We're still evaluating it, but I think as an initiative it was laudable. We're still evaluating the results.
We're in our final 10 minutes here, so we'll try to get through as many of these as possible.
Hi, this might be a little bit of an abstract question, but with the advent of self-driving cars, how do you see the TTC long-term adapting to this new technology?
And you were there at a Hillcrest, and I saw you and you were explaining all the stuff. I'm just wondering, what is the extent that you know, Nova and Comet, you know, community of metros, like share the information? Like they've been here for a while, and you know, you have systems like Hong Kong, like doing platform screen doors with non-automated driving, which at one point I think you said you absolutely needed PSDs. Yeah. So what is could you give an example of the TTC actually implementing something you saw like abroad, like say Taipei or something like that?
So you don't have to have ATC for platform screen doors. The Jubilee Line extension in London, the trains are still driven manually. It just helps because you've got to be very accurate where you stop. But it's not a prerequisite. So a good example of what have we done with Nova. Nova, we're members of Nova. It's a bunch of metros, in case you didn't know, and that was really fabulous hosting that conference. We have changed the way we maintain our escalators in terms of the actual time that we do the maintenance, but also the maintenance techniques as a direct result of information that we got from London. Even though London were in the bigger group, which is the Comet group, that was best practice, so we've adopted it.